This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1096, a conversation with Ron Frenz, creator commentary on Thor, War of the Pantheons.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. Love getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. I'm your host, Adam Chapman. This is episode 1096. It's a creator commentary with Ron Frenz, as we're talking about Thor, War of the Pantheons. We're talking about issues that are collected in the Thor Epic Collection, so it's not just the War of the Pantheons itself. So we're talking about issues 383 to 384 of Thor, as well as Thor 386 to 400. It's always an absolute delight to be able to talk with Ron about his work and to go through his work. And to do it in such a manner. It had been a long time since I'd actually read the entire Thor run by the Tom DeFalco, Ron Frenz team. So this was exciting to be able to kind of start at the beginning and work our way through it. So this is, the first episode of what I hope will be many with Ron, talking about the Thor run and kind of going through it piece by piece, issue by issue. So this was just an absolute joy. Really interesting conversation about, this particular run, how it's developed. We talk about, obviously there's a shift in inking, as Brett Breeding was the inker when he started on Thor, and that kind of shifts over time. So we talk about kind of why that happened and what was kind of going behind the scenes, how he was approaching the work. So this was just an absolute delight, as always. This is also Ron's 16th time on the show, if you can imagine. Before you know it, it'll be his 20th appearance, and I'll tell him that, and he'll be like, really? He might be incredulous that we've talked this many times, or he'll think feels like more. It could go either way. Anyways, this was a lot of fun, and I hope you enjoy this listening experience. You can email me at comicshenanigans@gmail.com. You can also rate the show on Apple Podcasts, listen to us on Apple Podcasts, and also listen to us on Spotify. Thanks again, and without further ado, let's jump right into the conversation with Ron Frenz discussing Thor, the War of the Pantheons, or Pantheons. Enjoy. Ron, welcome back to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Adam, and it is always a pleasure to be on Comic Shenanigans.
It's a pleasure having you as always. I think this is the 16th time. So at some point, I think you're just an honorary co-host at this point.
Well, that would be an honor as well. But I do have to be honest with you, when we record, I miss not hearing the theme.
That's true. It's a very good point.
I always have to listen to at least the very beginning of these interviews. I have to listen to them again so I can enjoy the theme before we hear your dulcet tones.
Love that.
So for anybody who ever does an interview with Adam, know that when you do the interview, you don't get to hear the theme.
I guess that's true. Are there other interviews that you've done where you get to hear the theme songs?
No.
So it's not just me.
No, sometimes when you do the podcast things where it's actually on video and all that kind of stuff, sometimes you do get to hear the intro and the theme and all that kind of stuff while you're kind of sitting in the amorphous green room, type of thing. But you're very much more brick and mortar here, so I appreciate that.
So before we talk about what I've actually brought you on to talk about, I guess we should talk about the fact that on July 23rd, you do have a story in Fantastic Four Fanfare number 3 coming out that you did with Tom DeFalco. What can you tell us about this story?
What I can tell you about this story is that I had great fun busting Tom DeFalco's balls about it because it revisits. Keeping in mind, for a little bit of context, Tom DeFalco was the editor that when Roger Stern initially pitched what ended up becoming Hobgoblin Lives, Tom DeFalco was the editor who said, Roger, I think I'm not saying it's not a great idea, but I just think too much time has passed, and the audience isn't there to revisit something from that long ago. Okay, that was Tom's editorial reasoning at the time.
Mm-hmm.
In that context, I took great pleasure in busting his chops because this 10-page Thing story, Ben Grimm story that we have put together, revisits a character dynamic that Tom DeFalco originally did in Marvel 2 and 1 with Ben Grimm way back in the day. That had since been kicked around and battered by other writers and all this, and Tom wanted to revisit it just as a nostalgic trip and to put his spin back on it and all this, and I very, very, very much enjoyed it because I enjoyed the original dynamic, and I was really happy to be a part of it. But I had to take the opportunity to bust his balls after taking this attitude about, it's so much time has passed to revisit that for the current readership, just, that kind of thing. Tom. I might use the word hypocritical, but I would never do that. Never, ever do that. But anyway, it's a fun little ditty that does revisit some of those dynamics. It's Ben Grimm at his best. It's a very character-oriented piece, and as Tom DeFalco does so well and has proven in the past with his other little 10-page epics, he is able to give you a full beginning, middle, and end of a story, and character dynamics, and a theme, and a conclusion that really, brings it all together in a wonderful little bow. And it's always a great, great pleasure to tell these little stories. So hopefully everybody will enjoy it. It involves some action and some adventure, and a Marvel character that I think a lot of people know and have some fondness for, that is shown in other media, and I think they'll enjoy it. If you've gone to the catalogs and you've seen the description that I've even posted on my Facebook page, then you know what other character it involves. But I don't want to give anything away. I also wanted to mention, I don't know whether you were going to mention it, and I don't want to step on it if you were, but Brett Breeding and I also did a cover for an upcoming X-Men issue, the new run of Uncanny X-Men. I believe it was number 17 coming out also in July. I think it's coming out earlier in July. So I will actually be back on the racks in 2 incidents, which surprises the heck out of me as much as it surprises the heck out of, I'm sure, a lot of people.
So you are correct. It is Uncanny X-Men 17. Because I had seen Gail Simone posting about it because she was a big fan of it. I know a lot of people were showing a lot of love for it. It's great to see. It's interesting because I feel like X-Men feels like something you haven't touched a lot of, right?
Oh, no. I was told in no uncertain terms at different points in my career, mostly later in my career, it was pointed out to me that X-Men was very rarefied air, and that I wasn't going anywhere near it. That was after my flame had dimmed slightly, but I was told in no uncertain terms that wasn't going to happen. So no, I never really did much with X-Men. I did a run of X Factor covers early in its run, and but I don't know if I've ever done any story content. I did like a Marvel Age preview page because nobody else was available, things like that. And I think I did like for the loose leaf handbook pages.
Oh yeah,
they were the different teams from different eras, and of course they tapped me to do the first era of the X-Men with like a pseudo Kirby feel and stuff. There were things like that. So bits and pieces, but never anything major. And again, this isn't really major either, although I was provided with a bunch of reference by some of the new characters, and I was able to handle Wolverine and Rogue and Gambit and Nightcrawler in their new outfits and stuff. But so it was fun to do, and I was glad Brett was able to come along for the ride. And that'll be out July 9th. And then the Fantastic Four. Our issue of Fantastic Four Fanfare will be the one that'll be out around the time the movie comes out. So maybe we'll benefit from people leaving the theater and rushing to buy something with the Fantastic Four on it at a comic store, and it'll be the top selling issue of the year, and I'll be beating my door down. I don't know. See, Uncle Ron is old enough that he doesn't have dreams like that anymore.
A question about the Fantastic Four Fanfare story. I know that we've talked in the last few years when you did, the sensational Spider-Man self-improvement story with Tom. You did the Thunderstrike story. You did an Enchantress story. And each of those, I kind of pointed out, and that each one kind of had an interesting emotional downbeat in those last pages, which really made them resonate, and which is part of why I sought out and now have all three of those final pages. I'm curious, did you find that there was the same type of emotional kind of crescendo that happened in this one that will really...
I'm afraid if you want a downbeat, you may have to look elsewhere, Adam.
Okay.
I would not characterize it as a downbeat, no.
Okay. Is it an emotional climax?
It's a contemplative beat.
Okay.
It definitely ends with like a 3-panel sequence of Ben Grimm making a point. And so it may serve the same function for you. I don't know, but I cannot speak to your need for emotional downbeats.
That is fair. A question about kind of the context, as you mentioned, like you're revisiting, something that's a little bit older by this point, as you want to let DeFalco know. I'm curious, like in terms of the context of this story, is it modern kind of at this point in time, or is it kind of a throwback to a different era?
It is absolutely placed in current continuity. Ben Grimm is wearing his wedding ring.
Okay.
And he is also wearing, although he really only needs it for like once a year, I guess. It's part of the new continuity that he can revert to human. Mm-hmm. Once a year or once a month?
I am embarrassed to say now I forget. You got me.
I don't know either. But he's wearing that wristband as well, because I wanted to do some research as to what he was currently wearing and all that, and I was actually kind of gratified to see that, at least according to the most of the covers I saw by Alex Ross, he looks very traditional. He's wearing the traditional trunks and doesn't have a big 4 on running pants or anything like that. There was nothing really new to do with the costuming, but I did include the wristband device and his wedding ring. So it's very much set in continuity. Because it's one of those kind of between the panels things. We find out that there's something Ben has been doing fairly regularly since those older stories that we now get a glimpse of. It's not something earth-shattering necessarily, but it's a bit of a regular thing that he has gotten into with this other character that means something to him. And I think the fans, especially if you're aware of that continuity, but even if you're not, it's one of those, they kind of wanted to do that with these stories, is since we were going to feature Ben, and I think that's one of the reasons Tom wanted to revisit this particular dynamic, is because it says something very positive about Ben and Ben's character that he was interested in exploring, and Ben's not terribly introspective or terribly demonstrative, but what we see in this story is who Ben is as a person, and how he feels about people, and that. I mean, it really is how he judges people and how he interacts with people, and how he comports himself. It was a lot of fun for me because I very much remember and thrived as a comics fan at a time when Ben Grimm was one of the cornerstones of the Marvel Universe. He was one of the most popular characters, one of the a lot of people's favorite character, and deserved it. He really is that kind of a salt of the earth character that brings a lot of humanity to the superhero action, and so it was a lot of fun to do. I hope people enjoy it, and and I hope the entire anthology approach to this to this Fantastic Four fanfare miniseries appeals to people, and that they do more of it with different characters and all of that. So it's a neat way to celebrate the Fantastic Four on the occasion of their new film. So.
Absolutely. Now I'm curious, like when did you get the call, or when did Tom get the call? Were you guys a package deal from the beginning? Like, how did you guys kind of get approached about this project?
Well, he was approached by the editor, which made perfect sense. And I believe it was the editor, Tom Brevoort's, intention from the beginning to kind of reconnect us as a team. I don't think the project sat with Tom for any period of time where it wasn't expected that it was going to be offered to me. But Tom did a standard plot, which I did not have a lot of input. So there may have been some time as Tom was working on it where he didn't know whether or not I was going to be drawing it. Usually if he knows I'm going to be penciling something, he holds off and discusses it with me first. That was not the case with this. So there may well have been a period of time where Tom was tapped as writer and then approached me about, would you be able to fit it in? Would you be interested? And I said, it always depends on the deadline, and the deadline worked out just great. So as I've said, I really enjoy doing these little 10-page ditties with DeFalco. So ditties with DeFalco. So it's been a pleasure. So.
I'm curious. I mean, there's something really special about how, first of all, Tom is able to write these 10-pagers, because as you've kind of mentioned earlier, like you get a lot of bang for your buck. You just, it might be 10 pages, but it doesn't feel like 10 pages. It feels like you have a full story, a full beginning, middle, and end, like really makes use of the real estate. I'm curious how, as a penciler, you come into a project like that, knowing that there is limited, page space like that, and trying to kind of figure out how to fit everything in and make it work economically, but also, in an appealing way, and making sure that the action, kind of comes to life. So do you find that a good, fun challenge each time, or how do you kind of approach it?
I find it, I don't know, a challenge. No, I don't really see it as a challenge anymore. You and I have talked before, and I think I've mentioned that, with Tom, every time I read the plot, it feels full. I would read 22-page plots and go, there's no way I'm fitting this in 22 pages, and yet it always flows like butter. Once you sit down to actually start penciling it and pacing it out, Tom knows what he's doing. He has a lot of experience with it, and he is a craft writer. So he does outlines first, and then builds on the outline and makes sure he stays on point and on theme and all of that. And he does the same thing for a 10-page story. So, he knows what he's putting in there is just enough to fill the cup, and works that way with his pencilers. So the challenge isn't necessarily there. The fun of it is what Tom is always able to give me is something to have fun with. Every time for him, I'm sure he would laughingly consider this his quiet, contemplative little 10 pages, because so often when you see a modern writer be tasked for a 10-page story, you're going to get somebody sitting in a room having a conversation, over coffee about, some aspect of their character or career or something, which can be very compelling given the character and given the writer, but that's not Tom. This has action and adventure and drama and risk and there are people in danger and superheroics and character interaction and dynamic that is just wonderful and fun, and it's all in 10 pages. It's just, for me, what's interesting about it is I like the 10-page format because you're not necessarily cutting back and forth and involving 27 different environments and all this kind of stuff in most cases, and it keeps it tight. It's like stand-up comics talking about to do a tight 10 minutes, and Tom never strays from his point. He never meanders as a storyteller, but in these 10 pages, you get a sense of a real thrust of the story that just, you got one or two things going on. You may have a subplot or a B story, but it only serves the story you're in. So there's no meandering, nothing we're going to check on later. It moves. And as a storyteller, that's very compelling. That keeps me engaged and interested as much as you hope it keeps the reader engaged and interested. I really enjoy the format, the 10-page format. And, I could very easily live... I'll give you an example. When Tom and I did that Mr. Right project, it was called The Right Project, that did a one-shot self-published thing. It was shorter stories. It was 11-page stories. And that was our plan, and were it to ever go to series, was to do, 2 stories in every issue. And there would be continuing subplots and all of that, but it would be very much like the Tales of Suspense and Tales to Astonish that Marvel did in the 60s, with the same characters, but we would move from villain to villain and subject to subject economically and quickly, and keep everybody hopefully engaged. So I very, very, very much enjoy that format.
I have a very pedantic question, or at least a very granular question. When you're drawing a character like the Thing, this sounds so silly, but obviously, you sketch out kind of the overall musculature, but then you have all those different blocks and bricks to kind of illustrate. Does that take a lot of extra time to be able to add the detail to the Thing?
It takes as much time as the detail on any character would. I don't really think it's any more involved as all of the accoutrement of Thor or the webbing on Spider-Man or anything like that. I, to this day, heavily reference Jack Kirby when I do the Thing. I just do. To me, that's Ben. I'm trying to match expressions, and I'm trying to match movement and the facial structure and everything that I remember identifying as a kid and as a young person reading the Fantastic Four by Kirby and by Buscema and Pollard, and so I'm very much trying to stay on target. I'm not interested in doing my take on the Thing. There's way too much of that going on for my taste, in my humble opinion. I do not enjoy seeing Ben 10 feet tall and looking like some other character. I always return to Kirby's man-sized, albeit thicker, and rocky Ben Grimm. And so I had very much had all my Kirby reference in front of me. And if you're a Kirby aficionado, you may even see some direct swipes as far as some of the close-ups and stuff, because my intent at all times, especially with the Thing, is to homage Jack Kirby's original design.
So speaking of Kirby, so we're going to talk obviously about your work on the first year or so of you illustrating the Mighty Thor with Tom DeFalco writing. I'm curious if we situate ourselves in 87 for a second, which is closer to 40 years than I would like, because it means...
I was 27.
Yeah.
27.
You were just a baby.
27. The luckiest guy on the planet. But please, go ahead.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I was thinking earlier, actually in the last few weeks, I was just thinking how it felt like comic creators used to break in much earlier. So there were younger people, they had a younger energy in comics. And I feel like I don't remember when I see names come up now, they're not people in their 20s, they're older than that, even when they're kind of breaking through in the big two. And I'm curious, and this isn't really a question, this is just more of a meditation, but it's just interesting to me how, you get in, you're doing Spider-Man at 24 years old. You have Jerry Conway in the 70s. He was just a kid himself writing Amazing Spider-Man. You had these people doing these things at such young ages, and then really, again, bringing an electricity and an energy to it all. And I'm just curious why that doesn't happen seem to be happening as much anymore, that when talent gets on these books, they're not these hungry younger people anymore.
I don't know. I would have no way of knowing what the ages are of the people working on the comics these days, to tell you the truth, Adam. So I really don't have an observation to make along those lines, to tell you the truth. Interestingly enough, though, when I was breaking in, and when I was, very much, even then, a student of the generation before me, with being a devotee of the Buscema's and Romita and Kirby and such, I met people at conventions. I would meet Marvel staffers who assumed I was a second career guy and that I was much older. They were quite shocked to find out I was in my 20s, because they just assumed that I had probably been working in advertising or in some other branch of commercial art and found comics because of what I was bringing to the comics. When the style that I was enmeshed in and presenting. So that happened more than once, that people were surprised that I was young because they just assumed I was an older second career guy.
Interesting.
That might be the case now. I have no idea. Because there are some fantastic, terrific illustrators working. I sometimes quibble about whether or not their storytelling is what we were, what was stressed to us, and what was quite frankly, the most important part of our skill set. So I sometimes, that doesn't really line up for me, depending on who I'm looking at. But there's some beautiful, beautiful illustrators.
Absolutely. So if we go back, you're 27 years old. Unfortunately, your tenure on Amazing Spider-Man has ended. So I'm curious about that kind of interregnum period, because we've talked before about how, Ralph Macchio brought you guys on to do a few kind of fill-ins for Thor. In his mind, almost kind of more auditioning you for Thor. You guys thought you were going to be doing Daredevil. But in this interim period, you do a cover of Tales of the Legion of Superheroes. I'm curious where that kind of came from, because you look down your list of credits, it's all Marvel, 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 and then there's this DC way earlier than you eventually jumping ship in the 90s and going and doing Superman. So I'm curious where that Tales of the Legion of Superheroes cover came from.
An offer by phone, which is something else that never happens anymore these days. But I don't even remember what DC editor it would have been. But, that would have obviously come. I wasn't under contract yet for Marvel. And, I made a splash on Spider-Man and Star Wars and things like that. So I was visible enough that I was offered occasionally other things. I don't know where in the course of things happened, but at one point, I've posted on Facebook about the fact that I was a big Johnny Quest fan when I was growing up, and Comico was doing the Johnny Quest book, and I was known enough that I heard that if you do anything for the Johnny Quest book, they send you a packet of the model sheets from the original series.
Oh, wow.
Xeroxes of the model sheets, which you can find all over the internet now, but this was all pre-internet. And I became obsessed with the idea of, I said, well, let's take a shot. So I actually cold called the Comico staff, the editor on the Johnny Quest book, and volunteered to do covers or pinups or something. I didn't volunteer for a full issue of anything. Not that they would have been happy to give me one or anything. I have no idea. But they were interested in having me. I ended up doing a wraparound cover and a pinup and things, which was fine by me because it was enough to get me the packet of Xerox of all of Doug Wildey's model sheets. And that's really all I was shooting for anyway. But that was a lot of fun. But yeah, it was a heady time for me because I was doing material that was high profile enough that I was known around the industry, so I was able to occasionally be offered things like that, or offer my services to things like this Johnny Quest thing to do some extra stuff. So it was a different time. We weren't caught up behind talent coordinators and all this. The editors were very much the touchstones of every project. Now I understand there are other personnel between the talent and the editors, which I don't understand how that works, to tell you the truth. I think editors should be trained as they were in my day. They were trained to make those kinds of decisions and make those kinds of choices. So I don't know. The more you overwork the plumbing, I think it just slows the entire process down, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. I did look it up. It looks like it was Jonathan Peterson was the editor.
On the Johnny Quest stuff?
No,
or
on the Legion of Superheroes book.
Okay. That was probably Jonathan that called me and asked me if I was interested. I do remember that those were all done, both Legion covers that I did were done off of sketches by, I believe, Ed Hannigan, who was a master of cover designs for Marvel and for DC, I believe. So I'm pretty sure they were both Ed Hannigan. But whoever did them, I was doing them off of conceptual drawings by another illustrator. So it was not, it was not working from scratch with they weren't working from scratch with an unknown. It was a controlled environment. But I enjoyed doing those. I grew up a Legion fan. I loved the early Jim Shooter, Kurt Swan stories and everything. I love that stuff.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about one thing. I don't think I'd ever really thought about it or took stock of it, but the more I'm reading, I'm rereading your Thor stuff, and obviously I'm a big fan of your Spider-Man stuff. It made me realize just how often, or I guess it was obviously your choice in how you wanted to approach storytelling, that you do really hit the reader with that opening kind of big splash on most issues in that first page. Was that something that was just the way you were kind of brought up to kind of hit you with the big splash first, or is that just something that you like to do as a storytelling maneuver?
Oh, it's absolutely something I would prefer to do as a storytelling maneuver, but that's also Tom DeFalco. I mean, that's, ultimately it's the writer. I mean, once we got more comfortable co-plotting and everything, that was, we might have had some give and take on that, and if I had an idea that served the story that might be more of a hook for the splash page, I would suggest it. But Tom and I very quickly, on Spider-Man, kind of became one brain on that kind of thing. And Tom doesn't need to be told how to grab a reader. So any splash page we did that was effective, or title page we did that was effective, would have been a product of the two of us. So.
One that I think is probably one of my favorites, just because it says such a great way of subverting expectations. In 386, you have a shot of, or go to
the troll?
Yeah. It's so funny.
I'm pretty sure that was DeFalco, because we just wanted to have some fun with getting rid of the beard. That was the one thing that we were really a little hesitant to do, because the one thing we didn't want was to alienate Walt's audience any more than we had to, any more than we already did by existing, and believe me, we were made very aware of that by doing conventions and such. Quite often there would be somebody in the crowd that would be, when's Walt coming back? And it's like, well, we're the new regular team. No, I know. When's Walt coming back? And it's like, oh, so you mean to be a dick? Okay. That happened more than once. But, we were both fans of Walt's stuff, but we both knew we couldn't be Walt. We didn't relate to the original myth the way Walt did, and didn't have the background in the original Norse myths. And Tom and I were both interested in reconnecting to the Marvel version of everything, and tying back into Stan and Jack's version of the Asgardian continuity and everything. So, and I just personally was eager to get back to the Thor of Kirby and Buscema, and so that's what we did. But yeah, that hook of a dangerous looking troll wielding a blade, and it just being for Thor to get shaved. There was a story reason for it, though, too, because he had gone through hell, literally, in the final issues of Simonson's run with Sal Buscema, that his body was battered and scarred and torn, and that's one of the reasons he let the beard grow in, and he wanted to make sure he was fully healed. So he shaved off the beard to take a look at it, because, yes, we were the ones who got rid of the beard, and at the time, DeFalco had a full beard, and at conventions, if a fan would ask him, why did you get rid of Thor's beard? Tom would just look him in the eye, dead serious, and go, I hate beards, as he's there with a full beard himself. I just hate them. And the kids, and the guys never knew how to react. It was always very funny to watch. But, and Tom never broke. That was his genius. But anyway, so we got rid of the beard. We also brought the beard back once Eric took over and all that kind of stuff. At one point, Tom would have some fun with it, because at one point, Eric grew a beard. But when he was still changing to Thor, and it was one of those things that we brought the beard back, but not on Thor, that kind of thing. It was kind of crazy.
The first, I was kind of reading from basically the start of your run in 386 to 400, and so most of those issues you do have Brett joining you on inks, but there was a few issues that you do have others. You have Joe Sinnott on issue 400. You have Romeo I'm going to get the last name wrong, Tanguy.
Romeo Tanguy, yeah.
He does 399. He got Don Heck on 398, as well as part of 397 and also 396. I'm curious, first of all, what was it like working with Don Heck or seeing Heck's inks over your pencils?
It was very interesting because the first issue that Mr. Heck came in and did for us, he redrew me on a whole bunch of stuff. He was doing his Thor over mine. And he had just come off, if I remember correctly, and some of this, forgive me because it has been many years, but what I remember hearing, though, he had just come off a DC project where he had basically been hired to doctor a younger illustrator, okay? And he was, his understanding was that he was brought on specifically to help this new guy along and doctor these pencils and polish them up. So when he was asked to come on Thor, he assumed that was his role. So the first issue, he redrew several shots of the characters to bring them into line with his vision of the characters and stuff. And that my understanding was that Ralph Macchio called him up and said, Don, I'm happy with this penciler. You don't need to be doing that. And he said, oh, okay. You know, being the total pro that all those gentlemen from that era were, he went, oh, no problem. And when he would ink me for the issue or two or issue and a half or two that he did after that, it was one of the coolest experiences of my life. I mean, even being redrawn by Don Heck is a really cool experience. There was one shot in particular that he redrew that Ralph Macchio actually decided to get a hold of pencils of my Xeroxes of my pencils, and hand them to somebody in production and have them re-inked closer to what I had done.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, that was one particular shot. And, you know, there was nothing wrong with what Don did, but it was Don Heck's version of Thor. It was very much Don Heck's version of Thor. And Ralph bothered to have it redone closer to my pencils. But like I said, after that initial conversation, some of my favorite pages are ones that were inked by Don Heck. There are several of them that I've used for my cover shot on Facebook and everything. You know, there are shots inked by Don Heck that I'm thrilled by. Because I wanted to work with all of those gentlemen. That was my ambition when I got into this, was to work with the guys that I grew up admiring, and to a large degree I got that. But there were a few that I would have really, on Thor in particular, I would have loved to have worked with Coletta at least once, with Vince Coletta. That was not to be because Ralph Macchio had his own experiences with Mr. Coletta and had decided that was not something that was going to happen, even if his penciler begged him, which his penciler kind of did at least once. So that was a joy. And those were, you know, Brett Breeding was phasing out of working on the book. I don't know what he was moving off to tell you the God's honest truth, because my idea of what was going on at the time is blurry at best, but that's why there were some issues that were half Brett and half Heck, and Romeo Tanguy came in for like $3.99, I believe. And so you know, that we had we were experimenting with different inkers, and then of course when Joe Sinnott agreed to ink 400 and stick around as our regular, that search immediately stopped because we had just hit the mother lode, and as I've said before, the angels sang, the skies opened up, and a beam of light shone down on Uncle Ron, and I never looked back, So
I've always thought it was so interesting as a creative endeavor to be a penciler and then to see different inkers do different things with your work and to channel you in different ways or add themselves to the work. So I guess that always flummoxes me. Like, I don't know how one feels comfortable with kind of giving up the control, because what ends up being on the page, you started it off with the pencils, but again, the inks and then the colors add their own dimensions. When you were breaking into the industry, did you ever have those thoughts of kind of feeling like you lost a bit of creative control if you weren't inking it on your own, or how did you feel about that?
No, I from the very beginning, never trained myself with the inking tools. I worked with them in art school, but my whole concept of working in this industry was one of collaboration. I early on as a reader, I came to recognize pencilers and inkers and how inkers affect pencilers and how pencilers look different under different inkers and on and on and on. So I always saw it as a highly, highly collaborative form, and I entered the industry with that idea in mind, that I was going to be inked by other people, hopefully people that, as I said before, that people I wanted to work with and people I'd always dreamed of working with. In fact, as I think about it, I'm remembering, my God, I sound old. I'm remembering now that one of the reasons that Brett ended up leaving the title was because I was slow on the pencils. There were times I was not feeding him pages in a way that was conducive to him completing them by deadline. So that's on me. That's one of the things that people don't understand about inkers and can be very cruel about when it comes to the inking job, is that the inkers are the anchor man. Even back in the day, these days lettering is done on computer and can be done almost overnight if it needs to be. And back then, what we used to occasionally do is letterers would sometimes letter on overlays, Xeroxes of the pages, and then somebody in production would paste all the word balloons and the captions down. I'm sure you've seen original art where the captions are falling off, or the rubber cement is giving up the ghost and things like that. Mm-hmm. So other things can be done during the production, but the inker can't ink anything until the penciler pencils it. And I spent time, especially under Ralph Macchio and on Thor. I was not a deadline darling. I was putting all the work I could into the pages, but not every month ran as smoothly as every other month. And unfortunately, I was as responsible as anybody for Brett moving off the project, because I wasn't turning the pages around in a rapid enough fashion that it worked for him to be able to ink them. It was less of a problem with Joe Sinnott, because Joe Sinnott was a consummate pro and a machine. So he never had any trouble. Al Milgram had less trouble with it, although I'm sure I taxed Mr. Milgram several times as well. So that's just the naked truth of the situation. Mm-hmm. And I given a choice, I would have loved to have had Brett ink everything I have ever done. But ultimately, that is what cost Brett the job, is that I just was not turning the work around fast enough. So.
There's an issue that happens in the middle of that kind of first year and a bit, and I'm just curious about the mechanics of how that happened is that I think it's issue 394. You do 3 pages with Tom, and then it goes into a Roger Stern, Bob Hall story. And I was just curious if that was like a mechanism of the timeline trying to get you guys caught up, and so you kind of have a framing sequence at the beginning, and then you move into a different story. I'm just curious how that kind of came about, if you remember.
That was an inventory story that was sitting in the drawer, and given everything that was going on with the schedule and me and Brett and everything else, Ralph Macchio decided that he would slot that fill-in by Roger Stern and Bob Hall. I forget who inked that. Do you have it in front of you?
Let me just check. That's 394. It is inked by Diana Albers.
No, that's the letterer.
Oh, no, sorry, you're right. Yeah, Tony DeZunga.
There you go, Tony DeZuniga. Okay, the one thing, and we figured we would do a framing sequence to keep it in continuity, to keep everybody engaged in what was going on. So we did the framing sequence that dealt with our continuity, and then we cut to. Now, the half splash that we cut to that I did of Thor, it's like an up angle on Thor with the lightning shooting and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
That is my version of the splash page of the inventory story by Bob Hall and Tony DeZuniga.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I don't know if I traced it off or if I just did my version of it. More than likely, I probably worked right off of their original to lead us into the rest of the issue.
I will say it's interesting. I mean, as you said, you do 3 pages here. That first page, which again, the big page splash that we were talking about, which is deceptively simple. Like on the face of it, it's just Daredevil, pulling Hogan out of the water and passing him to like paramedics and police. But there's just so much detail and so much effort put into that page. It really takes my breath away. Like there's something about it. You feel the wood of this like dock that they're at. There's just something about the way that you drew Daredevil in that sequence or in that page. Even the way that Hogan looks, like the way that you kind of place the arms kind of akimbo in a certain way, because that's they're just kind of pulling his comatose body out. I just was really taken with that page.
Well, thank you. I remember that page. I really was happy with that page. It was me trying my best to channel the 60s Marvel aesthetic, the weight and the drama, and of course Brett did a beautiful job on those pages. So the texture on the dock pilings and everything would be as much Brett as myself. But and Daredevil was, I was always more of a Romita Daredevil guy. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but the first issues that Romita did pencils and inks on were laid out by Kirby. Yes. That's how they kind of brought Romita from the DC romance aesthetic to this is what Marvel is that Jack would do these really loose breakdowns for him, storytelling breakdowns for him. And so that Daredevil was maybe a little bulkier than I would draw him now or draw him in his own book, but I was very much influenced by those early Kirby Romita Daredevil issues. So it all kind of came together. If Daredevil was going to appear in Thor and everything, I wanted to touch on that Kirby aesthetic. I had started moving into the Kirby weight of the characters and everything. Which was something else that Brett really wasn't enjoying. The 2 fill-ins we did early on, the Future Thor and the Secret Wars fill-in, I was very much just indulging my usual, John Salbuscema style that is more my natural style. And Brett was very happy with that stuff. He was very comfortable with that stuff. And as I was starting to fall into the Kirby, he was urging me not to go that direction. And I said, I'm sorry. That's just kind of how I have to find the character. If we're going to be doing this as a regular gig, that's this is kind of the way I need to find the character. And he put up with it for a while, but until I made it almost impossible, as I said before, for him to maintain the schedule. So,
Speaking of Daredevil, like the issue before that one, so I guess 393, you have a protracted sequence of having Daredevil fight Hogan throughout New York, which again really like the aesthetics of Daredevil here. Like he felt more. Again, and it makes sense hearing you talk about kind of the Romita / Kirby of it all, because it does feel like it very much has that energy of the swashbuckling Daredevil,
very much.
Which I enjoy at times.
If Tom and I had gotten Daredevil, it would have been at the point where, I believe it would have been at the point where Miller and Mazzucchelli left him smiling, walking with Karen Page through Hell's Kitchen with the sun shining. And we were feeling that would have been a great transition for us, because I've always been more of a fan of Daredevil as the swashbuckler, playing up the dare in Daredevil rather than the devil in Daredevil. The presentation piece I did for Ralph Macchio that he graciously displayed on his wall. He had it hanging on his office wall for a while. Daredevil was smiling, and it was about having fun, and kind of trying to recapture some of that Lee early Colin sense of high energy swashbuckling action and things like that. So that's very much what we were trying to do. Yeah.
When you were kind of casting about for the Asgardian characters, like it's interesting in my mind, when I think of your run, I think a lot of the Thor on Earth, and then having a lot of, the Eric stuff, and then Eric taking over. But so it had been a long time since I'd kind of read that first year and a bit, and really there's not a lot of Earth stuff at all. You're much more kind of in Asgard or in other realms. I'm curious, when you guys were kind of finding your feet on the book, was that a very conscious decision to kind of not bring him back to Earth right away?
What I remember as far as the decision making early on, and I think you and I have even talked about this, was that Tom wanted to challenge himself. Tom was hesitant to take the gig because he felt more comfortable with Earthbound characters like Peter Parker or Ben Grimm, and was not sure of his footing when it came to the Shakespearean dialogue and the cosmic grandeur of the Thor mythos. So he decided to jump in on the deep end and sink or swim. So that's why in our very first regular issue, he introduces the Celtic gods and sets up what ended up being the War of the Pantheons, and then sidetracks into our 3-issue Celestial Saga, and on and on. I mean, so yes, it was deliberate and considered in that Tom was, completely immersing himself in the cosmic aspects of Asgard and other worlds and the cosmic grandeur of it all, to test himself, to make sure he could do this for the long haul, which, of course, he proved himself like he always does, and did a wonderful job with it. And we were having a great time. I mean, I think he was a little hesitant at first, but with the certainly the enthusiastic backing of Ralph Macchio and myself, and just being thrilled with what he was doing, we hit our stride. Yeah.
How did you, like, when you draw characters like the Celestials? First of all, your Celestials look great. But what was your most direct inspiration? And were you just trying to be as faithful as possible, or did you even have a thought of trying to kind of make it more of your own spin, or did you want to be as authentic as possible to the Celestials?
Yeah, I had the Kirby reference in front of me. the stuff that Mark Grunwald and Ralph had done with the Celestials, with Keith Pollard and Gene Day. Mm-hmm. I had all of that stuff in front of me. When Roy Thomas on Thor decided to fold the Celestials and the Eternals into Marvel 616 continuity, that was, I believe that artwork, a lot of that was John Buscema and Chick Stone. I had all of that on my desk in front of me. So I was just trying not to screw it up. I am not a big one for deciding what Ron's Celestials are going to look like or anything. Although I got to design 2 Celestials in the course of all our time on the book, and that 3-parter, I got to design Exitar, the Exterminator, and then much later in the Black Galaxy saga, I designed another Celestial that was given birth in the Black Galaxy. So, if I had a statement to make on Celestials, I guess that would have been it. But all the other Celestials were off of the original reference.
Mm-hmm. One thing that is, and it's interesting hearing you talk about it, seeing your run and how quickly you dispense with the beard, and you kind of get rid of the armor, or at least he's not wearing it all the time, and then he does go against the Celestials, and now he's kind of takes it out of the bag, so to speak, and puts the armor back on.
But let me correct you for a second. Our very first issue, the very first regular issue, where he meets Lear, the Celtic god, and opens with that troll. He's wearing the armor through that whole issue.
Oh, that's right. You're right.
He doesn't put on his old traditional Kirby garb until the end. So.
No, you're absolutely correct. Okay. I was remiss. But I'm curious, in general, was that a very conscious decision, again, to kind of move away from what the way it had been, and kind of go back into more classic style? And again, was there any pushback from Ralph about that?
No, Ralph, I don't remember having any problems with some of our decision making with Ralph. I mean, when Ralph wrote the character before Walt, he was the traditional Thor and everything. So I don't think anybody was really having a problem. I mean, aside from the beard, and of course the armor stuff that was all very story specific, because he had been cursed by Hela and had brittle bones and all that kind of stuff. The lion's share of the stories that Walt Simonson did, either illustrated by himself or with Sal Buscema, Thor was wearing the traditional costume. The armor was very story specific. So nobody really had a problem with nobody felt like we were just tearing down. Maybe there were some Walt fans that felt we were just tearing down Walt's contributions, but that was never our intent, and that was certainly never the way we were selling it. We've always been very cognizant of, even when we made our left turn and had Eric take over as Thor, the purposes of the stories were always Eric was looking for Thor. Where's Thor? And recognizing that Eric isn't Thor. So we were never arrogant about this is what we're going to do, and if you don't like it, lump it type of thing. We always were, if not continuity was our watchword, consistency was our watchword. So, and I think we did a fairly decent job of not alienating the Walt fans so much. I mean, our sales were healthy. It's not like we went into the gutter, or steered the car into the embankment or anything, taking over for Walt. In fact, our newsstand sales were very healthy. So, we might have been a slightly more, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. Slightly more mainstream than Walt was doing, especially since so much of Walt's continuity was very specific to what he had been doing for the entire time he had been on the book. But accessible, I guess, maybe. Our stuff might have looked a little bit more like, traditional comics, like Sal Buscema's run did and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But we never had any, sales-wise, we never had any, never felt any pushback from Walt fans or anything. That's why we were on the book for like 6 or 7 years, because the sales department was happy with the sales, and Ralph Macchio was happy with our work, and I didn't give him too many gray hairs, and we hit a stride and stuck with it. And I have said in interviews before, I knew every morning when I got up to work, I knew that these were going to be the good old days. That I was happy as a creative clam, working with Tom and knowing that our editor was happy with the work, and very different situation from Spider-Girl being in threat of being canceled every 3 issues, that kind of thing. The complete opposite of that. So.
That's true. It's interesting. I guess part of that perspective also might have been, unfortunately, because of how your tenure on Spider-Man ended, and then being able to still work with Tom, work with an editor who was now very encouraging, and kind of being able to kind of feel the creative freedom was probably led into more of that perspective of being able to be self-aware and realize, well, no, this is the good times right now.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, the dark times on Spider-Man were relatively brief before we were fired. Before that happened, Danny Fingeroth was our editor on Spider-Man, and it was very much the same situation as it was with Ralph. It was a very collaborative relationship with our editor. The editor was happy with what we were doing, so we were in full creative bloom, and we were just having fun every issue, trying to, entertain ourselves and entertain the readership. So it was a return to that, because, like I said, the time that was, there was kind of a negative experience on Spider-Man, considering we were only on the book for like 2.5 years total, the really bad stuff was relatively brief and then, ended abruptly. Mm-hmm. So it definitely was a return to a far more pleasant creative situation and conducive to a wonderfully creative experience. Yeah.
I'm going to use a word that I think you don't like generally, but when you were drawing Thor in the armor that he had from the Simonson run with Buscema, did you find that armor more challenging in terms of just the musculature and how it moved in terms of portraying some of the action? And were you craving being able to just kind of make him have Thor in his traditional togs, and that you had a better sense visually of how to portray the dynamic, make dynamic action out of that particular costume?
No. In fact, I had a discussion with Brett about how he wanted to handle the suit, because we did it differently than Sal Buscema had handled it. And a little differently than Walt had handled it on the covers that he had done. Brett was interested in doing it more the way it had appeared in the Avengers by John Buscema and Tom Palmer. And so that's what Brett ended up wanting to do with it. And I had no problem with that. It was, somebody before, there was precedence for it. So I had no problem with that. And, so Brett's finishing is really what made that literally and figuratively shine. So, I don't remember having too much trouble with it. As far as like being eager to get him back in the regular suit and everything, yes. Yeah. Because I had a couple of ideas that, way back in Silver Surfer #4, when John Buscema first handled Thor, he did this thing where he kind of had a split cape coming off the shoulders and everything, and it was like almost like 2 capes, and I think they were joined at the top, but then they separated as and I was curious to kind of plug that in, and we kind of opened up the sides on the tunic We had a few little visual differences that we were going to play with the outfit, and so I was eager to get him back into his traditional outfit with those slight variations, and so I won't lie about that. But the issue where he meets Lear is one of my favorites. There's some really nice fight scenes in there and stuff. Tom really gave us a lot of room to play, and with John Workman was our letterer at the time, and was fantastic sound effects, and Brett was doing terrific work. So that's a solid issue. I enjoyed that issue.
Now, Lear, sorry, I'm going to show that I'm naive sometimes. This was Lear's first appearance, correct?
Yes. Yeah, we actually, Tom, I don't know how influenced he was, but his Gal Friday at the time was into Celtic lore.
Oh, really?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I'll name drop. That was Brett Breeding trying to call. So I get to name drop in the course of the interview.
There you go.
A young woman was Tom DeFalco's Gal Friday. She was, I don't know if this was like a reenactment organization she was involved with, or whether this was just a hobby of hers, but she was a font of reference and knowledge about the Celtic mythology and the Celtic warriors and everything. So she supplied me with some, because I don't know whether she was an influence on DeFalco wanting to go ahead and explore the Celtic pantheon. She may well have been, I don't know, but it was a pantheon that had not been touched on with all of the other ones that had been touched on. So it was fresh ground, and Tom was interested in exploring it, and he pitched the first couple of characters. What was interesting about it was there was a Tales of Asgard story that was it Tales of Asgard, or was it the Marvel Comics Presents? It might have been Marvel Comics Presents. Remember the anthology title that they were doing?
Oh, yeah.
They did a story about the Celtic warriors, and Tom Morgan actually designed Tabor, and I forget what the third character's name was, but he actually designed two of the characters. I only designed Lear. He designed the other characters that showed up as we got closer to 400. But yeah, the design of Lear was using reference from Tom's Gal Friday. Sue Flaxman, I believe, was her name. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry, Sue. But I believe that was who it was, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, I think he was a cool looking character, and I got to draw him for the Handbook of the Marvel Universe, and he stuck around up through 400 and everything. I'm sorry that we lost track of him, to tell you the truth. I thought those were pretty cool characters.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I know you don't have the issues in front of you at the moment, but in the issue where you do introduce Lear, I think it's like the page before, you have this shot behind Thor, and he's being surrounded by Lear's people, and just from the back, I don't know why I really like this so much. It's just this really cool way that you have the cape draping off of Thor, because it's not just straight down. It's almost like it's arcing over, kind of his larger shoulder pads and then kind of falling down. I wish you had it in front of you, just because I really like that page.
Well, I remember that page because I had to draw a lot of Celts, but. That was very much based on how John Buscema handled the cloaks, and I might have even gone a little further on the arch coming up off the shoulders and stuff. I know early on I was going pretty crazy with that kind of stuff, and it was before I was really influenced by how Jack Kirby handled it, which, as I pointed out, was Brett probably preferred more the Buscema approach than the Kirby approach. But, we sometimes evolve in ways that our fans don't appreciate. What can I tell you?
I want to ask you about something that I know we've talked about before, and I've heard you talk about it in other podcasts, but it's hard to not talk about the first year and a half of Thor without mentioning it, is that, Thor 390 has a team up with the Captain, which was what Steve Rogers was going by at the time, and it has a momentous moment where he picks up the hammer, which obviously after 2019 takes on a different cultural touchstone. So I'm curious what you can kind of tell us about the decision to have Steve pick up the hammer and how you brought it to life.
It was all Walt Simonson's fault. If Walt had never done Beta Ray Bill, I dare say we probably wouldn't have played with it ourselves. But because that was now part of canon, it was Brett Breeding who, in a conversation we were having, said, now that they've kind of opened the door that whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor, if anybody would be worthy to wield the hammer, you'd think it would be Steve Rogers, wouldn't you? And I said, yeah, probably. You would like to think that if the hammer really knows worthy, that it would be Steve, sure. And at the same time, what was going on was that Tom and I were working on this story, crafting the story of Thor coming back to Earth after the Celestial Saga, and reconnecting with Earth and reconnecting with the Avengers and everything, and finding out that Steve and Tony Stark had been at odds because of Tony's behavior during the Armor Wars, reclaiming his tech and everything. They had brought him into conflict with Steve as the captain, and pardon me. And we were interested in putting Thor in that situation where two people that he respects and admires, and Iron Man being generally thought of as being Thor's best friend in the superhero community. They knew each other's identity before any of the other Avengers, things like that. They were very connected from the early days of the Avengers. And we wanted him to come down on the side of Steve Rogers, and we were wondering, how do we play that? What could happen that would make Thor sure that Steve was probably the one in the right, and or put Thor in a position where he's chosen to stay out of it, even though these are two of his best friends in the superhero community. Mm-hmm. So we came up with Brett's idea of having Steve wield the hammer. So we established that it's not a matter of strength. The grog of the God Crusher can't budget. Nobody can budget, but Steve's able to heft it long enough to swing it and get it to Thor during the course of the heat of the battle. And that's kind of the two-pronged approach. Brett had brought it up as a concept, and we needed something that would make Thor say, okay, you wielded the hammer, so you obviously are still the Captain America I knew. You're still that guy. You're still, just because you're wearing a different costume, it's not telling me you're nuts or anything. Because, also what was going on was that Steve told Thor that he had been, deposed by the government and was no longer Captain America. And Thor said, well, let's go overthrow the government then. And Steve said, no, that kind of thing. Thor was now once again plopped back into the constant contradictions and gray of humanity, and that's not as Guardians, It's always been a bit of a frustration for Thor. I mean, he understands it more than most Asgardians, But the constant, there is nothing black and white about our humanity and how we interact with the people we share the planet with, and even the people we care about. And that was a very frustrating time for Thor. I believe he even punched a boulder over it.
I think you're right.
But yeah, he, it worked out for us because, by the end of that, he understands where Steve is coming from and has made the decision to stay out of it. So there you go. Those were the motivations, and if not for Brett's suggestion, we might have had to come up with something else. So
when you're in a movie theater and you see Captain America pick up that hammer, what did you feel?
I felt like it had been done several times since, and that if they actually were influenced by a comic, it was probably another comic, not ours. That's pretty much how I felt about it. I felt it was the same way I felt when I saw in the first Avengers film, saw the helicarrier lift off out of the water. We were the first to do that in our little Hercules miniseries that you and I have talked about. If you remember what episode of Comic Shenanigans that was. But we were the first one to show the helicarrier coming up out of the water. But as I became I was made aware of later, it was done in the Ultimates, and it was done later. So if Joss Whedon or anybody at Marvel had seen that from a comic, if they were taking that from comic book reference and hadn't just come up with it on their own, which was perfectly logical as well, they probably saw it somewhere besides that Hercules miniseries, because I strongly suspect that it's only a handful of people ever saw that Hercules miniseries.
Which is criminal, and if people haven't read it, they should pick it up and read it. It's in the Thor Epic Collection that covers the period right after Thor disappears to Heroes Reborn, and we did talk about that on episode 1067 from November 2024.
There you go. It was, the Epic Collection was called The Lost Gods, I think, or something. Thor and the Lost Gods.
I think you're right, yeah.
But, so... I mean, a lot of these things, they had teased it in Age of Ultron. They had Steve Budget, those kind of. But everybody, the fans tend to, and with all due respect, because they pay my rent, but fans tend to think in absolutes. And I don't think any of these situations happen as textbook absolutes. Everybody is now saying, in light of Endgame, that Steve must have chosen not to lift the hammer out of deference for Thor. That he didn't want to embarrass Thor, so he was able to budget. But see, even in our circumstance, where Thor, was being dogpiled by a bunch of Egyptian soldiers, and Steve wanted to get the hammer to Thor, that, it's the heat of the moment type of thing, The magic, when you're dealing with magic, there are no hard and fast rules. So, my belief is that all of those different situations, given any Tuesday, Steve might not be able to pick up the hammer. I don't know. I mean, people ask, well, why didn't he change into a Thor variant? Well, that we did think about, because I actually did a design of a Thor variant that was Captain America based and all that kind of stuff. I read it on Facebook at one point. But the bottom line on that was Beta Ray Bill changed into a Thor variant because he picked up the cane and okay? Steve did not do that. Steve just picked up the hammer. So that's why he didn't, there wasn't a big kaboom and he changed into some kind of a wacky Thor variant. That and the fact that Uncle Ron couldn't come up with anything he liked anyway. But Tom and I did discuss it and decided, no, that's not how it would work. So.
A question that I had, it's interesting, like, I think it's about 5 or 6 issues in, you bring in Spider-Man for an issue. And what I thought was really funny and kind of metatextual, but I'm curious if you felt that way at the time. On the cover, it says, "It had to happen, guest starring the Amazing Spider-Man." I'm like, well, why did it have to happen? Because it's you guys?
Yeah, that's all that meant. Yeah, that's all we meant by that. Actually, there was something else that Tom wrote. If you have them in front of you, go to the issue before that.
Mm-hmm.
The final page of the issue before that ends with Seth taking a bath, and we come in tight on his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And what does the next issue caption say?
Next issue, Thor battles a dynamic new supervillain side by side with the Amazing Spider-Man. Don't miss next issue.
Isn't it Spider-Man holding a little placard or something?
Yes, it's just signed Ron and Tom and Brett.
Yeah, there you go. That was it. Yeah, it was very much a celebration of just us getting to handle Spider-Man again. That's what it had to happen means. Because, if we were launching a new title, it had become kind of standard back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was a little later than the 80s that it became standard, that if you were launching a new book, Spider-Man usually showed up in like issue 3. So you almost had the obligatory Spider-Man guest star. I think we had Spider-Man in Thunderstrike show up in like issue 4, I believe. So, so there's that aspect of it as well. But, no, I did the cover copy for those. Ralph Macchio was very kind. If I had included the copy on my sketch and he liked it, I was allowed to pencil it in on the covers for the production people. So, yes, I was responsible for it. Had to happen, just like Amazing Spider-Man. And that was why. So, but yeah, and you're talking also metatextually, that issue debuted the Mongoose.
Yes.
And the Mongoose was a character that Tom and I came up with that actually I and Tom came up with because it kind of came out of my sketchbook that we were originally going to use in Spider-Man. Had we not been unceremoniously removed from the Spider-Man title, we would have gotten around to Mongoose. And it was an interesting little ditty where Mongoose was coming to kill the Cobra. So it was going to be this whole Ricky Tikki Tavi kind of dynamic. He was going to have a past with the Cobra that Spider-Man had fought a couple of times in the Roger Stern, John Romita Jr. phase. And Spider-Man was going to get stuck between the two of them and stuff. And we actually did a scene where the Absorbing Man and Titania went to the airport in chauffeur outfits to pick up a mysterious candidate to join Zemo's Masters of Evil. And they engage with Spider-Man at the airport because Titania caused the ruckus.
Mm-hmm.
And you see a shadowy figure with a slouch hat and a trench coat getting off of an international flight, and he reacts to the disturbance of the fight and everything and just disappears into the crowd. And he's in deep, deep shadow, but you see the sharp teeth. And that was Mongoose getting off the plane. And we were going to use him in Spider-Man, but we got canned, so we never got around to it, and nobody ever picked up on that, so we just decided to use him in Thor when we got to Thor. And we figured, well, if we're going to do Mongoose, and again, metatextually, let's guest star Spider-Man, because we were going to originally introduce him in Spider-Man. So.
Do you recall if there was any pushback from the Spider Office about using Spider-Man?
Oh, just Just try to keep the one thing that the Spider Office insisted on, and so we did it, is where it fell in continuity. He had just gotten back from that lovely Spider-Man versus Wolverine spot. So they went in on the cover and added the Spinne on the back of the suit because it was the commercial suit that he bought in Germany. The Spinne is what they call Spider-Man. That's what the Spider-Man title is called in Germany. So if you look at that cover, somebody has scrawled the Spinne across the red spider on his back. And thankfully, we don't show his back all that much in that issue. but that was one of the things we had to deal with. You know, when you're talking about continuity, we had to deal with Steve Rogers being in the captain costume, and we had to deal with Spider-Man being in his commercially bought German Spider-Man suit.
I will say about the appearance of the captain for a moment, like that issue, the action sequences with the captain really sing. Like there's something about it, and I also really like the effect on, because obviously it wasn't the regular Captain America shield, it was the shield that Tony had given to to Steve to use when he was the captain. And I really like the lighting effects, or the that you got. I don't know if that's more of a you thing or a Brett thing or a little bit of both. But the lighting effects and the way that you kind of used that shield, I really liked how it reflected the light.
Oh yeah, Brett was using Zipatone for the metallics on the shield and everything. Yeah, and it worked great because that was just it was like raw vibranium or something, or was it vibranium? Maybe it was adamantium. I don't know, but it wasn't the same hybrid that the actual shield is. But yeah, it was just a metallic, silver metallic disc, and Brett used Zipatone very effectively on it to get that effect. And yeah, it was really cool. Very cool.
One thing I really liked of yours, and it looked like you were having fun with it, is that in 391, when you do have Thor finally kind of return to his Sigurd Jarlsson persona, it looked like you were having a lot of fun drawing Thor as a regular guy, without the accoutrements, and just kind of trying to pass off as, a construction worker. Were you having as much fun with that as it looked like on the page?
Yeah. Yes, very much so. Another little secret that you'll only hear on Comic Shenanigans is I always, I talk about trying to get into the original zeitgeist of the character. I always, immersed myself in Ditko for Spider-Man. I immersed myself in Kirby for Thor. But you also want to try to find people that feel like those characters, so you can imbue them with the humanity you need to imbue them with. At least that's always been my approach. But what I mean by that is, like at one point, I was very, very flattered. Louise Jones, who's now Louise Simonson and has been for decades, she at one point at a convention mentioned and kind of congratulated me on the fact that she felt that I had successfully made Mary Jane Watson seem very human, just very organic. And she said it's quite easy for different illustrators to just like fall into the Ramita model, and just she comes across very plastic and just very two-dimensional. And she was, thanking me and congratulating Tom and I on humanizing Mary Jane. Now, one of the ways I was able to do that is I've been very fortunate in my life to be involved with a variety of different women as friends and otherwise, and different aspects of some of those women I used for Mary Jane. So Mary Jane was very human to me, was very real to me. Okay? Mm-hmm. And the same was true with Thor. But, we didn't have... it was well into our Thor run when they did The Return of the Incredible Hulk on television, and Eric Kramer played Thor. And Tom and I both loved it. We loved his performance. Everybody was afraid to ask us about it the next day. And Tom said everybody looked away in the office because they were afraid he was going to be, somehow damaged by it or something. But he and I talked on the phone, and we were both laughing because we both really enjoyed it, and especially enjoyed Eric Kramer as the character. But that was even before all of that. There was never a live action Thor for me to. Anybody can go. Well, Chris Hemsworth is Thor, so we can. You can look at the first couple of Thor movies and the Avengers movie, and there's Thor. So we know what he looks like in 3 dimensions and in real life. I fortunately had a friend since high school who's also a fantastic illustrator named Dan Horn. Daniel Robert Horn is one of the best fantasy illustrators you've ever seen. Plus, he's a sculptor, and just if there's an art form, he has probably experimented with it and mastered it. He's just an incredible creative force. And he is a tall kid. When we knew each other in school, he was probably a good head taller than me. He was like a brother to me. And yet he was soft-spoken and very thoughtful and very physical. He played hockey. And he was Thor to me. Mm-hmm. So when, this is a protracted way of getting back around to what you're saying. So putting Thor in a jean jacket and jeans and everything, it worked for me because it was Dan, Thor was always Dan. And if you ever met the guy, you would understand what I mean because he's an imposing physical presence, but he has this gentle voice, and it's just he's Thor, and always has been to me. And I think I finally did get around years later to telling Dan that, but that's we look for that. We look for those connections so that we can believe these characters that much more. So yeah, it was a lot of fun putting Thor in plain clothes. I had never considered that. It was something that I had the Salpa reference in front of me and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, and we also very much wanted to touch back on that. One, because it was an avenue to introduce Eric Masterson, but from the very beginning, we saw the connection with Sigurd Jarlsson and, more importantly, with Jerry Sapristi, which was a Walt Simonson character that we were very, very interested in maintaining the connection to because, we wanted the contrast of, Thor as a warrior, Don Blake was a healer, and we didn't want to go back to Don Blake, so we decided on Thor as a warrior and often wrecks buildings, and Eric is a builder. He's a creator. He's an architect. So, it was all right there with Walt and Sal having given Sigurd a job as a construction worker and introducing Jerry Sapristi as a foreman and all this kind of stuff, that we had the perfect, subtle way of introducing Eric Masterson to the cast.
It does, and I mean, looking at it in its completed form, it does feel like very planning ahead, kind of, which makes sense. Obviously, that's a big part of what Tom does in his stories. But I mean, it seems even farther afield than what we would normally see in terms of seeding things. But you guys knew that early on that you would really start to use this.
Oh, we knew from the very beginning that Eric was going to be Thor's human identity at some point. But we were going to play the long game because we weren't in danger of being canceled every 3 issues. And we wanted the readers to like Eric. We wanted Thor to get to know Eric. We wanted Thor and Eric to have a relationship of some kind of a friendship and bond before we went the direction we went. because, but yeah, it was always in the cards. Before we even started on the title, we had discussions about giving him a human identity, that connective tissue with humanity that was so important to the original stuff. And so we had come up with the idea of Eric having a son and his relationship with his son paralleling the relationship between Thor and Odin, and all of it. That was all part of the game plan from day one. We were just in no hurry to get there. We wanted to make sure that we were bringing the readers along with us.
You do 2 issues introducing Quicksand. I'm curious, from an artistic perspective, how much thought went into trying to differentiate how she would use her powers from a character like Sandman so that they would look visually different?
A lot. I remember Tom having a lot of input into that, into the character, because it was his initial idea, and he came up with the name. Because there were at times I almost thought that what we did with her power set would have been better served by a name like Sandstorm or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he was interested in doing, a Sandman type character, but we came up with the idea of, with the hair and everything, that it would be like a cross between Medusa and, any number of other characters that we could do visuals with. And then I came up with the Sandstorm idea, where she could spin her hair and all this kind of stuff that she did a few times. And so I think it served fairly well. I thought she was kind of an interesting character, because we never really did get to explore her specific origins, and even Tom was surprised. He had a character actually point out when she became human for a couple of panels that he went, "Oh, I didn't realize you were Asian." Well, that's because Tom didn't realize she was Asian. But I had always intended for her to be Asian. And it wasn't until she took her human form that Tom went, "Oh, I didn't know she was Asian." I went, "Yeah, she's always been Asian." And he went, "Oh, okay." And then I laughed when I saw the final copy, because he actually had, I think it was Count Tagar or something. No, it was Mongoose himself, that said, "Oh, I didn't realize you were Asian," that kind of thing. So that was Tom speaking.
That's very funny. Yeah, no, it was interesting kind of reading her appearances, because, again, it was interesting to see how you manipulated her powers, and, again, how you did set her apart from just being a Sandman clone, but really adding something different visually.
You mean like boobies?
No.
I was making a joke. That's okay. It was right there, Adam. I had to do it.
I mean, that's true. It was right there. We're getting closer to the end of our time, but in general, I'm curious about, as you guys were kind of building to this War of the Pantheons and the war with Set, I'm curious about how early on did you guys kind of come up with the idea that this is how you were going to kind of bring back Odin to the book and kind of restore that element of Asgard and kind of remove Baldur from being, the Lord, and now it's going to be Odin back in his rightful place. How early on did you guys know that that's what you were kind of leading to, and that Odin was being kept by Set?
I don't. If Tom had it on his little chart, I don't know whether I was aware where it was heading, or that Odin was a prisoner in the Black Pyramid. To tell you the truth, I loved it, and I enjoyed drawing it and pulling the reference to he'd be wearing the same tatters of the outfit he was wearing when he was lost with Surtur at the end of Walt's epic and stuff. Mm-hmm. But I didn't. I don't remember seeing it coming necessarily. I will throw in, if we're coming to the end of our time, the character, and you're going to have to help me because you have it right in front of you.
Okay.
when they're in the Black Pyramid and they meet the Egyptian god that's in the bubble.
Yes.
What is that character's name?
Okay, I might need a moment to pull that, but I know exactly what we were talking about. Bess. Bess, the god of luck and the lord of probability.
Yes. That character was suggested to me by a fan at a convention.
Really?
Apropos of nothing, that they even presented me with a drawing of Bess. And I don't know if we ever got around to thanking the fan in the letter column or not. I know it's something we talked about, and I'm afraid their name is lost to my old man memory. But I remember that I was given a drawing, and it's something that appealed to me, and normally we wouldn't do something like this, but even at the time, I asked the fans, how would you feel if we actually incorporated this? And they were very enthusiastic about it. And I said, we'll do everything we can to get you a credit. And he goes, well, I don't even care about that, that kind of thing. And I pitched it to Tom because we needed the source of Seth's power, why he was so successfully being able to accomplish what he was accomplishing. And he had captured and harnessed Bess's power of probability, so that every engagement, every battle was falling in his favor. And but yeah, that idea came from a fan. So,
that's very cool.
If Bess ever shows up in a movie, it'll become a controversy, and we'll all know his name, and I'll be sued.
In $3.99, there's a great you have a great establishing shot where you have Eric looking up at something in the sky, and then you have this brilliant 2-pager just above the city of New York, and you just have you're playing with clouds and shadows, and the idea of that even people on Earth can tell that there's a battle in heavens. I'm curious what it was like to kind of put that together. And again, this was the issue also that you were inked by Romeo.
Yes, Romeo Zengong came in on that issue. I pulled that image, and I may run it as my front page on my Facebook at some point. But what I remember about that was I remember pulling a whole bunch of old Tales of Asgards by Kirby and Coletta, and looking at some of the big battle scenes that he would do, and basing it on a little bit of this and a little bit of that from some Kirby stuff, and trying to make it look like a cloud formation with the scope of that shot I think works kind of neat. I mean, it's always sobering to see the Twin Towers when we showed New York back in the day, because that was always one of the more identifiable landmarks and stuff. But yeah, I was happy with the scope of that shot, and I think it worked fairly well and colored up halfway decent and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's that scope was the biggest transition that Tom and I had to make from Spider-Man. Spider-Man is 9 panels a page. Spider-Man is intimate, ground level, human, and Thor is a completely different thing. Thor is double-page splashes and 4-panel pages and cosmic battles and scope, and Ralph Macchio at one point complimented me just with Balder and some of the other Asgardians. He says, you're never in doubt that you're looking at a god, because they just stood tall and straight, and I would shoot up at them whenever possible. The camera was always positioned slightly lower than their eye line, so you were always kind of looking up at them and stuff. And And it was always, when I got a chance to do Balder, I wasn't interested. We had the white hair from the Walt run, but I didn't want him to just have any kind of hair. I kind of gave him a Caesar haircut because I wanted him to look like, a statue. I was going to say a Greek statue, but that would be the wrong Pantheon. But I want him to look, you don't want him to have like a part on the side and look like a regular dude, you want him to look like a god.
Mm-hmm.
And I always had a lot of fun with that kind of stuff. It was a very, very different thing, a very different approach. And going back and forth sometimes can be a little daunting. But it's something that, I see it all as part and parcel of serving the character.
A question I had about 400. Actually, before I get to 400, at the very end of 399, you bring Surtur back into the Thor mythos at this point to have Thor fight him powered up by the Odin Force. I'm curious how you felt taking on, the artistic duties of that character that was obviously so linked to Simonson's take on Thor.
Well, yeah, no doubt about it. And but he had been done prior to Walt's run by Kirby and by Buscema and by other illustrators. So I tried to split the difference. Walt did a very graphic horn arrangement and stuff, and so I was looking at what Kirby and Buscema had done. So I went back more to the traditional horns, but the thing that Walt brought in, and again he did it very graphically, and I didn't do it quite as graphically, but I did the constant fire around the head. So. And the fire around his midsection. So what I was trying to do was split the difference between Kirby's version and Walt's version. I don't know how successful I was, but that was my intent. And so he would be immediately recognizable to the Walt readers and to anybody else. So, overall, I think it worked. We never got any pushback on it. I think by 400... people had kind of resigned themselves to the fact that Tom and I were sticking around. So, I think it took them a few years to realize, oh, God, this isn't going to go away anytime soon, is it? We were like, we were hanging on, that kind of thing. So,
in 400 in particular, there's a few panels near the end of the main story. There's one where it's a splash page, and you have Odin kind of putting his arm almost around Thor, and Thor's kind of looking a little forlorn. It feels that feels so authentically Kirby at that moment. And then 2 pages later, you have a shot of Odin kind of in his regalia saying, Asgard will endure, and Thor kind of thrusting out his hammer. And again, it felt like he very much captured the Kirby aesthetic there, not more so than any other place, but in particular, those really stood out.
Well, thank you. That's all we were going for. I mean, I believe there's even on the splash page of 400 a dedication just to Jack and to Stan, making it, if it wasn't obvious already, making it obvious that, Tom and I were very much interested in celebrating their version of Asgard and all of those characters. So, if we were able to pull that off, then we did what we set out to do.
Excellent. Okay, well, I am going to let you get back to your evening because you've already been so generous with your time. You better believe I'm going to have you come back, though, to talk more Thor. This was only the first, year and a bit, so there's so much more to delve into with you if you're game. But it would be great to have you come back and really break down the further evolution of your take on Thor.
I am not done completely badgering your listening audience with whatever you want to ask me, Adam. As I've said before, and I'll say it again for this episode, I always appreciate your insights and your curiosities and your questions, and I love to talk about the work because it was a joy to be able to work on it and to do it and to look back on it and all of that. So I thank you for the time that you spend doing this.
It's always my pleasure. Thank you so much, Ron.
All right, you take care of yourself, Adam.